So who are you?
I am Mike Mayo. I am a developer for the Rackspace Cloud. I build our iPhone apps for Rackspace Cloud and SliceHost. I've also built another iPhone app for Rackspace Email and Apps called Cloud Notes, which lets you keep your notes on your iPhone in sync with notes on the web. And I also contribute to open source projects that relate to the Rackspace Cloud and my own. One, for example, is called ASI HTTP request.
What's that for people who might not know?
That is ASI HTTP request is a popular and, in my opinion, the best HTTP library for Objective-C for making iPhone and macOS 10 apps. Cocoa comes with networking classes already, but they're not as easy to use as ASI HTTP request. It really takes out all of the headache and plumbing of, talking to a web service or, pulling in an RSS feed for your app or anything like that. Wow. So, and, what I did is, I saw the project and thought, it would be really nice to add Rackspace Cloud file support so that it could be really easy to, push files and content and pull it from, the Rackspace Cloud. So that's one of my favorite recent contributions. Also, we've built some, bindings to our API for cloud files. We have a Python binding for cloud servers that's about to come out, and yeah, so that's a large part of what I do too.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really fun.
So we're here to talk about this new Apple iPad, right?
Yes,
which just came out this week.
Yes.
This will run in a week, so by the time this video comes out, it's a week and a half old. And, but you've already been trolling through the SDK, and you've built already the beginnings of an app for the iPad.
Right. As soon as the announcement was going on, I had the iPhone developer portal just refreshing constantly until I finally saw the SDK and downloaded it right away and started on what will be the Rackspace Cloud iPad app. And I think that's going to be really exciting. There are a lot of possibilities for what I can do with that. So beginning to explore all of that now.
So without talking about Rackspace in specific, let's just talk about the iPad. What do you think?
The iPad is interesting to me. It's, at first I was a bit disappointed while I was reading the live blogs of the announcement. No camera, closed platform, still have to go through Apple to get apps published. All of those things that I don't like about the iPhone ecosystem are also there in the iPad. And that was a little frustrating at first, but then once I got the simulator and realized just how much space you have and what you can do with it, then, I'm hooked. So I'm going to buy it the second it comes out. And
now I can hear all sorts of developers who work on Windows or on older Macintoshes going, yeah, we've had that space forever. Why are you getting excited about space?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've messed around with desktop apps too. I think what makes it so exciting is that it's an entirely new, user experience style. It's your fingers. Before it was a mouse pointer and keyboard, and now you can have completely different ways of interacting with a computer. Like you see Steve Jobs pinching out a stack of photos, and that's not something you could really do in an intuitive way on a normal laptop or desktop computer.
Yeah.
So all those new interactions that are possible are really exciting.
There were some of that with the Microsoft Tablet PC, but the problem with the tablet PC is it didn't go deep. You could do some of those interactions, and on Windows 7 they have even more, but you get into Office, and Office really wasn't designed from the ground up for that touch or the mouse or the writing experience. And so you would have a great experience maybe here, but you dig in and all of a sudden you're having a bad experience. It's not clean and smooth.
And I think the iPad's going to do that right. I mean, that's what you usually see from Apple. I mean, before the iPhone, I was using a Palm Trio, and I thought it was wonderful. And then the iPhone comes out and shows you, what a touch-based phone interaction should really be like. And I think we're going to see that again with the iPad. And people who develop for the iPad are going to develop specifically for it. So touch is going to be the first thing you're thinking about, you know.
What are you learning from the SDK? You've been trolling through the SDK and looking at the APIs and looking at what you can do with it. What are you learning there?
Well, so far, I mean, it's basically exactly like writing iPhone apps. The only difference is you get new UI components that, you know, account for larger screen space. So,
give me a sense of what those UI components would be.
Well, for instance, like on a lot of iPhone apps, you see what's called a UI table view, and it's the standard list view you see like in the contacts or mail or Tweety or Rackspace Cloud or any app that's a list of data. You know, flick through the list, and that's a UI table view. You tap something, maybe you go to another deeper list or a detailed view of something.
Or a picture.
Or a picture, yeah, anything. And that's a very commonly used UI element. And with the iPad SDK, it adds a few, I don't know all of them yet, but a few more UI elements that are designed for, you know, a 9.7-inch screen. Like, it's a new one called a UI split view controller. And that's the view you see in the iPad Mail that has a table view on the left and then a large detail view on the right, and then when you rotate it takes away the table view and focuses on the detailed view. You know, it's that sort of stuff. It's new UI components, but otherwise it's really almost exactly like the iPhone SDK.
Very interesting.
And I think it'll be flexible for when the iPad adds things in future generations, like a camera. I mean, there's already a framework for using cameras in the SDK. So once a camera comes out,
it has a camera.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm using the camera in the Rackspace Cloud app, so like that code will work when the iPad has a camera.
I heard actually the code name for this was iPad Mini, which
really?
tells you there's going to be a bigger one coming someday.
Right?
You know, that sort of leaked out. You know, that I'm sure Apple employees won't talk about that because they don't like to let people know.
They're pretty tight-lipped.
But clearly, this is going to be a family of products now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just the first of many. I mean, there's so much more they can add.
I call the iPhone the iPad Mini Nano now.
Yeah, I like that. But one thing that really interests me about the iPad is I feel like it's most likely a glimpse into what will eventually be macOS 11, and you know, in some ways that's scary, in some ways that's exciting. If this becomes macOS 11 and we end up having to go through Apple to publish any app, that's really scary. I don't like that at all. But I do like the idea of, you know, regular people being able to use a computer without having to think about things like file systems and command line interfaces and whatnot. Although I always want a command line, but you know, my mom doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
you really see this as a pretty steep shift or a deep shift for the industry. That
I think
we're going to
so.
see computing devices that look more like iPhones rather than.
I think so eventually. I mean, I don't see the standard computer that we're used to now going away. I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to, you know, develop applications on an iPad. I mean, I don't think that would be a great experience. I think like normal laptops and desktops and whatnot will still be around, but you know, these types of like pad computers, when they get bigger and you can attach accessories like a keyboard when you need a keyboard, like the iPad does, I think that over time we'll see that eventually dominate. So that's what I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Who knows?
I think you're right. You know, I mean, how many people are on computers today? What, 1.5 billion, something like that?
Right.
And so there's 7 billion people in the world. That means there's still more people in the world who haven't even touched a computer yet.
Exactly.
Compared to people who have. And so.
And I watched my parents. I watched them use Windows, and they were so frustrated and didn't understand it. So I suggested they switch to Mac. And they didn't understand that either, and now they switch back to Windows, and it's like for them, a touch tablet is exactly what they should be using for their computer.
This is an interesting point. So I have a mother-in-law who doesn't speak English and it lives with us, and she reads Farsi, and she doesn't know what a computer is.
Isn't
She
that
knows
the
what
language
paper-
they bring up in Microsoft interviews back in the day?
Yeah, exactly. So she doesn't use computers. She doesn't use a cell phone. She can barely use a regular standard phone with a dial pad. But she does read Farsi, right? And she does read paper, and she can write, And so handing her, this with a Farsi newspaper on it, I think will get her into the computing world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be intuitive to her. And with multi-touch, you have so many metaphors that are like real life. I mean, if you look back at when the mouse came out, there were so many people that thought it was just the weirdest, most unnatural idea. But, look at the ebook, and you actually can turn the page, and it'll turn with your finger, not just a flick.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff that more mimics the real world is going to be really powerful.
Yeah.
So, give
me some tips because you've been developing other things, and then you came into the iPhone world. How do you have to switch your mind to being a
completely different. I mean, I've primarily been a web developer. Doing like LAMP stack, Ruby on Rails web apps and Java web apps, and switching to something like a native application for something like an iPhone or any downloaded executable file on your computer. It's a completely different mindset. You think of things differently. Like when you're a web developer, you think about the HTTP request cycle, and everything is like one thing at a time happening. Submit a form, process the form, bring back a web page to handle that, or AJAX response, or whatever it is. But with with something like a desktop or iPhone application, you're more responding to events as they happen, and it's a completely different mindset. It's a weird context switch to go from like web to iPhone and then back to web, multiple times in a day. But one thing that helps it, at least for me, is that when I'm doing something like an iPhone app, I'm using a completely different IDE. I'm using Xcode. It's a completely different programming language, completely different set of tools. I mean, it just feels like, kind of like people who speak multiple languages, they can easily switch between speaking English and Spanish. And it's kind of like that to me. I think if I had to make web apps in Objective-C, I would probably get confused. But the fact that they're so much different makes the context switch a little easier.
Any tips for how to build a great iPhone app, or mistakes you made when you were first starting out?
I don't know about a great iPhone app, but no, I'm just kidding. Well, one thing, as far as mistakes, I'd suggest testing a lot. And, I have this kind of like sneaking suspicion that that's why AT&T is so terrible in San Francisco, is because maybe they wanted all the developers out here to test for bad connections or whatnot. But I don't know. Test a lot. Try to encounter any error case you can think of. With most of my apps, they're all talking to web services like SliceHost or Rackspace's APIs, and usually when you're testing, it all works. So make sure you account for when there's an outage, or accounting for no internet connection's easy. That's easy to check, but prepare for a response from a service that you don't expect. And that's kind of obvious advice, but it's easy to forget to do that.
Yeah.
So,
are cloud services now the new file system? Since
it
is
the
for device
me.
itself doesn't have a file system, right?
Yeah, it is for me. I have everything on the cloud in some form or fashion. So, everything that's important to me, I have in GitHub, or my own hosted Git on SliceHost. And
what's GitHub for people who don't know?
GitHub is a GitHub is a website that is a popular source control. It's an interface to a popular source control tool called Git, which was created by Linus Torvalds to manage the Linux kernel. So it's a distributed version control system. So it's really helpful for large projects like the Linux kernel with thousands of contributors. Subversion's another popular one, but Subversion doesn't work well when you have thousands of people working on a project. So then came Git, and then GitHub was just a really great web app for using Git. So
we were just talking off camera about building maybe a new kind of Twitter app for the home. you need to store data somewhere, right? If you're going to
Yeah.
do a search, you want to store data and shove it somewhere, and then
Right.
pull it back. Is there any tips that you would have for people who are
I kind of
building new kinds of iPhone or iPad apps that are going to use, Rackspace Cloud or
Right.
another
I mean,
cloud system?
for me, I like to blend it. Like for cloud notes, I'm storing notes on the cloud, but I also store them locally, and then I keep up with a hash for it. It's called an e-tag, and then I use that to keep up with the service to make sure that the local stored note and the one on the cloud they're in sync. And if they're not, then I'll fork them off, and then you'll have 2 copies of the note so that you don't lose anything. So, but local storage will always be important because it's faster. I mean, and if you're sitting on an airplane and you don't have an internet connection at all, you still need to be able to use your software. So, I kind of see cloud as just more like a redundant store until you get into things that are very large, like your music library that won't fit on your phone. So,
Although these devices would have 16 or 32 or
16, 32, and 64
Gigs.
gigabytes. So
So-
for me, 64 gigabytes is my music collection. So, and I'm going to want more than just my music
Yeah.
on it. So, I'm still not going to put all of my music on the iPad when I get it. So, so a cloud service, I know there are so many out there. I don't really use them, but I know there's Spotify right? And,
Yep.
and Pandora is popular. There are all these services. So I think that's going to help out a lot because I can live with missing a few songs,
Yep.
So, but other things like my notes are very important to me. I don't want to ever have to go to the cloud to get them. So, you got to kind of blend it together, I guess.
Very cool.
So,
Any other things you're learning about iPhone or iPad development, that would help other developers who are just getting into this world?
well, I mean, I think if you're getting into it, the first piece of advice I have is to not be afraid of Objective-C. When I first looked at it, and when I show some of my friends who do Ruby on Rails or other languages, they look at Objective-C and think it just looks strange. And it does compared to other languages. The syntax is quite different than really anything else I've ever seen. And, don't let that intimidate you, and, get a good book. Pragmatic Programmers have a great iPhone SDK book, and it's really easy to read, and it's a great way to learn it. So, and then just open your mind and try to think of something interesting.
Yeah. Tell us about the new app you're working on. What is it going to do?
Well, I don't know everything it's going to do yet, but it's going to be a port of the Rackspace Cloud iPhone app. But with all the extra screen space, I'm going to bring in a lot of things that I left out of the iPhone app on purpose. I've kept the iPhone app simple so that you could, not be overwhelmed with the interface. So if you go to like Rackspace Cloud's web console, there are a lot of things you can do that you can't do on the iPhone. And I didn't want to have that many buttons, but now I have room for those buttons. So we can do some interesting stuff. Now I'm going to show, real-time updates of the status of the system as a whole. So, if your website's down and you're like, what's going on? You don't have to dig into your servers. You can just open the app and you're going to see, there's a power outage and wherever, and know that faster. Whereas that wouldn't really fit well on the iPhone.
Yeah.
So
Are you going to have hooks into the support infrastructure, the chat?
Oh, that's one thing I really want to do. I'm waiting for that to hopefully be added to the API, but I've been talking to some of the other people at Rackspace about that, and I think that will come at some point. But yeah, I would love to have live chat on the iPad and track your tickets and get geo data on your servers and CDN. I'd love to see a map view where I can see where is all my hardware in the world, and then
Yeah.
I think that could be an interesting
That's getting more
visualization.
important because Rackspace keeps opening new data centers.
Right. They had
Or-
Chicago or whatever. I don't even know where they all are,
The
but
cloud systems are growing so fast that we're struggling to keep up. We're doing
yeah,
some major
they
stuff.
are. It's going through the roof. And then when you can get to the point where you can start saying where you want a server, that could be really exciting. If I find a lot of my traffic's coming from San Francisco, I'm going to want
that's a
hardware
good
that's
point.
closer to San Francisco.
Well, that's also a good
So-
point because we use a CDN to replicate content
Right.
around the world and get it closer to the customers.
Exactly.
In, India or whatever. And so seeing where the live data is and seeing where the CDNs are is important, right?
Yeah,
And that'll
absolutely.
help you if somebody's complaining, hey, your app is slow, that can help you debug it a little bit and figure out, oh, maybe that CDN, that node on the edge is having problems, and let's talk to Rackspace about that.
Exactly. And you could even, Google Analytics or any sort of, or your own log files or whatever, figure out where your growth is and, move your infrastructure to serve that. Yeah. That could be really exciting. So
where do we find you? So we can find information when you release the new iPad app and all that fun stuff.
Well, I have a blog at overheard.com.
Okay.
And I have, I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is greenasus. And
how did you get that name?
So when I was a kid, my friend Gary, we were hanging around the pool at my parents' house fixing a liner, and he started coming up with random colors, and greenuses and blutica, those were a couple of the colors. So when I got online years later, I used blutica as my handle and then forgot the password and then switched to greenuses. And I've just been that for years and years. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for giving us a little look into what you're doing with the iPad and
my pleasure.
How the world is shifting for developers. So.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks.
It was great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.